moved there when I was 17. I was a Denver police officer for 39 years and got involved in the counter cult, the whole area back in 1976 is when I began. And at the time I was going to a church called Foothills Bible Church. And while I was there, they were always talking about this young lady named Rachel, who the parents were looking for 3.5 years. And she evidently took off with this nomadic cult, which some of us know known as the Jim Roberts group or the Garbage Eaters, and that's not what they call themselves. They got other names because they didn't really have a name for themselves. I should get it. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
When I was, my voice really carries. I guess that's from being a police officer for so long. But the thing that fascinated me, I mean, while we were there, they hired a deprogrammer, and they went out, they found her, they grabbed her, and they did this deprogramming, and it was successful. And she was in the group for 3.5 years. And just to make a long story short with her, I was fascinated, especially being a police officer. At that time, I'd been on the police department about 5 years because I started in '71. And I was just fascinated by this, how somebody could join a cult, how they could be involved. And that night, I must have interviewed her for like 2 hours, just asking her question after question, and just really got interested in it because of that. And she was the one that introduced me to my first deprogramming. She asked me one time if we ever do one, would you like to come? And that happened. I remember it was Easter morning, and she knocked on my door. I think it was like 1977, and somebody that she knew in the group, Mindy was her name, and they had these deprogrammers come in from all over the country. And what was sad about that, for 30 days they were with her, and she never came out. And to this day, she is still in the group. But during that 30-day period, I met almost everybody at that time that was doing what they were calling deprogramming back in the mid-70s. Because when it wasn't working, they would get, the parents would say, okay, we tried you, and they'd call other people. And this went on for a period of 4 weeks. And she never, came out of the group, and is, in it to this day. But that was my catalyst. And then 1978 happened in Jonestown. Jonestown happened, and I was sitting there watching television. And I was glued to the television because I realized that this went beyond some of the theological differences, and there must have been, some more control that was going on. And I began to study it, and I got involved with the Cult Awareness Network. Was on their board of directors from 1980 to 1983, and just from there, just became involved in helping people in any way I could, speaking about the subject, you name it. And I did this all along while I was a police officer. And what I want to tell you, this presentation I'm giving you, and I've changed a couple things. It's usually directed because I give a lot of presentations to law enforcement. And as you've heard here, one of the big problems in law enforcement is, I tell you, and I know cops very well, as you can imagine, after 39 years. And I don't know about Alaska so much, talking to Glory, sometimes I think, when I hear it, the thinking is a little bit different here, but cops get calls on something like this, and it's a gray area, and they hate gray areas. The other problem is when they get calls on it, usually the person calling them to report something is not the individual that's being, beaten or sexually assaulted. Because as you know, officers need the outcry from the victim. And the outcry has to be, in some period of time from the actual assaults. The further it's away from the outcry, the harder it is, obviously, to prosecute something. So it's just an area. So one thing I've done with police departments, I speak at criminal justice classes at quite a few of the universities in Colorado. And I try to focus on the crime that's going on in these groups and to give them alternative ways to deal with this without violating religious freedom, because that's what a lot of them are afraid of. And to think outside the box, to use the things they're learning in community policing, which is a big thing this day and age. When I was on the Denver Police Department, we used the Sarah model, which was a way to try to solve problems that really hadn't reached the level of a criminal violation. But we would go out and we would see if there was a gang house, say for instance, or neighbors were fighting with each other, we would go in to try to solve the problem before it escalated to the point of somebody getting hurt. And this is what I try to tell law enforcement. You're gonna have to use that type of thinking. Don't think about anything else. If you have a group like this in your area, if you get a call, just visit them. If you're the officer that works the area, just like you do with anything else, just drop in and say hello. Sometimes that's all you have to do. And I've had situations, I tell officers, where police officers actually did that. And people came out of the cult, and guess who they called? The police officer, because that was the only person they knew that was outside the group. And it's an interesting dynamic. And it would take too long to go into some of the stories that were success, but there's still a lot of education that has to be done with the police and law enforcement in this area. It's so delicate, for them. This is a web page that I put together, cults in law enforcement. Hopefully, law enforcement comes to it. I have my contact information. If they need any help, I try to keep it updated with the latest, and I put videos on there. Anything I know that law enforcement would be interested in. And then here, just to give you, when I was involved in 1981, like I said, I started getting involved in helping parents get their kids out of cults. In this particular case, I didn't even know it was online until yesterday when I was just searching around. I found it on the xpremi.org. And premies were a follower of a cult leader by the name of Guru Maharaji during the 60s and 70s, and he's still around. But I was indicted by the grand jury, and this is a little bit of the story. After I was off the police department for a year and a half, because when you have an indictment by the grand jury, they won't let you work. But after a year and a half, the charges were dropped, and because the charges were dropped, there was no reason not to let me back on the police department, because there was no department violations without criminal violations. So, and I promised the chief after the hearing, he made me promise that I wouldn't kidnap anybody in my off-duty hours anymore. So I promised him that I wouldn't do that anymore. And I've been involved in, when I can, with interventions, when time permitting. If not, I call people like Dave Clark, to help out. Just talking about the sexual deviance in cults. And remember, I'm gearing this towards law enforcement. So, in one of the most shocking doctrines of the Branch Davidian leader David Koresh was the sexual demands placed upon women and young girls in his group. According to U.S. Today, while the men in what some former cultists have described as an anguished celibacy, Koresh freely takes whatever woman catches his fancy, sometimes girls as young as 12. This was a book, actually, I was quoted in this book, and gave the author of this book, his name is Robert Snow. He was a captain in Indiana, on the Indianapolis police. So he wrote this book on deadly cults. And just to put that in there. Well, that was the book there. Jim Jones, of course, we've all talked about him. It's funny how he keeps coming up, but I bring up to law enforcement, what happened there. It says here, one leader which shares many similarities with David Koresh, Jim Jones of Jonestown. Jones' sexual gluttony became another focal point. The egotistical leader insisted that he only had sex with his followers to satisfy their needs. He presented him as the only legitimate object of sexual desire. And that's from that book, People's Temple, People's Tomb, by Phil Kearns. Another picture of Koresh. I get them mixed up. Of Jim Jones, back then. Of course, the famous Time magazine cover after it all happened. And like Dave pointed out, most of the children in this group, as Kenneth Wooden pointed out, had the syringes in their backs. because they wouldn't take the cyanide, so they had to kill him that way. And for Alan, I thought I'd throw the Unification Church and some of their sexual exploits. It says before Reverend Moon arrived in America, his fathers say he taught a type of ritual sex. Since Moon was a pure man, sex with him is supposed to purify both body and soul. And marriages of other cultists were in fact invalid until the wives slept with Moon. And that's from that book there, The Spirit of Sun on Moon, Soul 11. This one here is talking about another ritual he had of sexual rituals. And of course, in this book here that came out, she talks in here about some of the stuff that went on at the mansion in Terrytown, which Alan has referred to, which he's been at several times. And then I'm going to move on to David Koresh. And, of course, his real name was Vernon Howell. He changed his name. Originally, he grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And one thing that I've seen as I've done the studies, it is amazing how many cult groups, and I have about 20 listed already. And one of these days, I'm just going to do a study on that, where the leaders grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist. And then they branched out and started their own cults. And it's amazing to me. This was, of course, a fire. There's still a lot of debate after the 50-day standoff who really started the fire, whether it was the government, whether it was them, or whether it was just an accident. Again, it says in here, Koresh was fixated with sex and with a taste for younger girls. Now, this here, this is Grace Dominguez, and I put her in here. This is my brother-in-law's wife. I met her back in about '98, and was called down to a family in Colorado Springs whose son was in the Branch Davidians, and they had hooked up. And she had called me and said, "Do you want to meet this woman named Grace?" At that time, it was Grace Adams. And she was involved in the Branch Davidians. One thing I learned from her in talking with her when I first met her is about half of the group were Australians and New Zealanders. And I don't know if a lot of people knew that, because Koresh, evidently, and I asked her that, I said, well, how come? And she said, well, he contacted a lot of our relatives because she's Samoan. And a lot of her relatives who are Samoan in Hawaii met Koresh when he would vacation there. And so, and one thing I've learned about them, I was in New Zealand, I actually stayed with her family for close to a month, around 2000 or so. And that's what, she told me about it. But the thing about Grace that's amazing, her story's incredible. She's back in New Zealand helping her mom now, who's really elderly and having problems. But she lost her sister in a fire, a first cousin, 2 nieces, and her husband, her sister Rebecca. And I remember her and I, we were doing a TV show in Denver together, and right in the middle of the show, Grace broke down and just started to weep. And the guy that was talking with us says, "What's going on?" And I didn't really know. I knew it obviously had to be a trigger or something like that. But the thing is, I asked her as we drove back after the interview, I said, "What happened?" And she said, "I just realized while we were sitting there, something he was asking me, that I still hated my sister for doing what she did to me." Now, what she did to her on a particular night, Koresh decided that it was Grace's turn to have sexual relations with her, and told her, "This will be the night. Come up to my room at such and such time, and you're going to be with me," because that's what he did. This really bothered her. She was in a group about 1.5 years at this point, and she decided to go up a little earlier with a friend and went up to his room, I guess, which was higher than everybody else's. And she went up and was going to tell him, but she never knocked on the door. Koresh heard her whispering outside and said, opens the door, "What are you doing here?" And then finally she just told him, "God told me not to have sex with you." So Koresh was rather upset. He had a little bell right there above it. He rang the bell. She said, it's like a Twilight Zone. And when I pictured this, everyone got up. This was 3 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. And everybody went to the chapel. He put everybody in the chapel, sat Grace up in the front, and ridiculed her. And the first thing he said to her was, how in the world could God tell you not to have sex with me when I'm God? I never told you that. And so he ridiculed her. Her sister, and that was the thing, she even walked up because she was mad and slapped her across the face. Wow. Because she was so mad at her. Koresh then locked her up for 4 months. She was literally under lock and key for 4 months. There's a video about this. I think you have one, Dave, don't you? There's a show in New Zealand called Extreme Close-Up. It's similar to our 60 Minutes. And they devoted an entire show to Grace's story. And she went back and visited Waco. But they locked her up for 4 months. She was smart. While she was there, she was sewing all the members' clothes. She had nothing to do. She'd say, bring your clothes to me. I'll mend them for you. I got nothing else to do. And she had a guard at the door. Well, finally, one day when she was sitting there, she was looking at her visa. And it had expired. And she goes, aha, Dave may let me get out of here because he may not want the trouble with immigration. So she knocks on the back of the door. The guy unlocks it and says, go show David my visa. And sure enough, he looked at it and said, get her out of here. Got her on the plane and sent a guard with her. She gets to San Francisco, and she doesn't know what happened to this day. She freaked out on the plane so bad that they had to restrain her, literally taped her to the seat. She was screaming and yelling at the top of her lungs, and she doesn't remember this. She sort of came to her senses, was at a psychiatric institute for 2 weeks. They called her Jane Doe at first until they realized who she was. And of course, it was hard to find her family being all the way in New Zealand, but eventually they came out and got her. And she's still working through a lot of the problems, but I had her speaking. This was a conference that I speak at often in Colorado. It's the Colorado Organization of Victim Assistance. They have it every year, and we give some talks on cults to them. So just a little bit of her story. So, and of course, I met her, and then she met my brother-in-law, and they fell in love and got married. So, but they're both back there now. Oh. Yeah, this is Dave Clark's favorite guy in Philadelphia, Stewart Trail, called the Forever Family. And somebody was talking earlier about the concept of the family. A lot of these groups that came out of the 60s, referred to themselves as family. He originally, and then he changed his name, as it says on this one here, Stewart Trail, the leader of the Forever Family from 71 to 76, and leader of the Church of the Bible Understanding from 76 to present. It's the same group. He just changed the name back in 1976. And one of the things, I put this article in that came out in this group, a lot of beatings of the children, a lot of the stuff you've heard. In this particular case, the boy died after 150 whacks with a board. He passed away. 4 people went to jail. The leaders got away with it because I guess he wasn't there, at the time. Oops, I'm going too fast. So that group is still around. And I'll tell you, that's a tough group, as Dave will tell you. I worked with a guy who was actually a policeman's brother who was in this group. Worked with him for months, and he stayed out for over 2 years. And then I was disheartened when I got the call from his brother, and he said he went back, and he's back in the group today. And it just dumbfounded me. But the hold that this guy has on him is incredible. This was, I put this in here. This is Remnant Fellowship. I don't know if you ever heard of that with Gwen Shemblin. Yeah. She started this way down thing and really got into a lot of churches around the country doing this way down. The thing that's amazing, a lot of the churches that invited her, they didn't realize that she denied most of the essentials that Christians believe in her theology, but none of them ever took the time to look at it. But this is one of the cases that happened here. This Atlanta couple was sentenced to 30 years in prison and the beating death of their 8-year-old son. A case that prompted authorities to raid the family's church, that church there, because it supports corporal punishment. Prosecutors said Joseph and Sonia Smith beat their son Joseph, locked him in a wooden box, and confined him in a closet for hours at a time before he died in 2003. The boy's parents had told authorities that Joseph had passed out and never regained consciousness. After the family gathered in the kitchen to participate in a prayer session with their church over the internet. So, and you remember, as I'm talking to law enforcement and I'm telling these things, see, these are the kind of things that fire them up, especially when it comes to children. And you'll see, I probably, when I give this presentation, I hit this a little harder than other places. And this is Gwen Shemlin, the leader of the group. I tell you one thing, you don't want to be overweight in that group, because what I've heard from members, she slams them pretty hard, you know, and is pretty bad. But I like what she says here. In answer, it says, yeah, the charismatic woman known for creating the best-selling Christian weight down loss program called the Way Down Workshop, said the trial underway this week in Atlanta suburb is their chance to set the record straight. The church condones discipline, not abuse, said Shemlin. In an exclusive interview, she called the spanking a loving, time-tested, ancient teaching from the Bible. And she has, on her webpage, if you go to their webpage, she has a whole webpage defending these people, saying that what they did was not wrong. So, just incredible.
Mark?
Yeah.
Before Joseph Smith died, Gwen Shamlin would have these sermons that were networked through people's computers. So, like, you know, they didn't really have churches set around the country. They just had like these little pockets, and then she would give the sermon like as a teleconference, or phone conference kind of thing. So people could call in and ask questions. And the mother of that boy called and was saying, you know, I don't know what to do with this kid. He's just, but then, I didn't know what to do with him. But then after I sort of, you know, adopted your teachings and so forth, he's all in control now, and this kind of thing. And she's talking about following your teachings, and Gwen Shamlin saying, you know, you're doing great. That's just, you know, you're just right. Just some you know, some information that law enforcement found to be very interesting in the case. So they ended up like raiding her church and trying to nail her for, you know, at least partly for that death, but they couldn't pin it on her enough.
Yeah, and I think that's why they were having the prayer via the internet, right? Because he wasn't there at the Remnant Fellowship. I didn't really understand that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I have the recording on my website.
Oh, do you? Oh, I have to check the recording out on her website. Moses David Berg. Now this is one, you know, the Children of God, now known, you know, later changed their name to the Family. Still around, of course. Moses David Berg died. This guy, I would say, when it comes to the sexual abuse, he's got to be in the top 3. Another group, you know, that's started in the 60s. A lot of these groups, you know, during the hippie days, that you know, were forming with their communes. This girl here is giving us Celeste Jones, you know, filming a video. You know, and in the video, she rubbed her bottom and wiggled for the camera. What they would do is, members all over would do these, especially the young girls, these provocative type dances, and then they would send the film to David Berg, and he would get these films from all over. Actually, in South America, they found a lot of these films, and that's when the officials down there raided them. And this here just shows you, this is a picture of them in the 60s. Look like any of the, you know, most of the other hippies that were around. And this here was the practice of flirty fishing, which they still say they do. I was at a conference with cult apologists, not that I'm a cult apologist, but I go and I check them out. And the leaders of the Children of God were there. They were asked if they still do this. They said, yes, sure we do. And of course, you know, this particular information was taken right off their webpage, thefamily.org. So you can go and see it there. But quoting the book of James, you know, talking about, you know, would you do it for Jesus? Then why not for others? A brother or sister be naked, destitute of daily food, including sex. Of course, he added that. And one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding, give them not those things which are needful to the body, sex. What does it profit? So, gives you an idea of where he was at. This here is before the internet. This little pamphlet is probably 30 years old. This is what they used to pass out back then. And in here, it told the girls how to be bait. Literally, that the girls could go out in order for the kingdom of God give their body to men to bring them in to the group. And that's what FFing, as they called it, that was another word, flirty fishing. And again, it's talking here, the greatest need is love, justifying sexual activity. These are 3 girls that were members of it. They said, isolated from society, we were controlled by fear of the government, police, doctors, social workers, and even greater fear of God's wrath if we ever left the protection of the family. We were thrown in adulthood unprepared for the outside cult's confines. We had no identity, no bank account, national insurance number, or medical histories. We were never taught to reason, think, or analyze, or evaluate for ourselves. And this is, I think, we've been hearing this over and over here during this. This was a picture that came out with David Berg, probably in the 70s, and with all the women around in there. Now, what I want to do here is I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to play just a quick video. Try to get to my desktop here on the children of God, just to give you just 10 minutes. This video is about. It was a 2-hour documentary. I don't know when you ever saw it. Maybe some of you get lost and found. A second generation member put this together that grew up in the group. This is only 9 minutes of it. Just to give you an idea, Noah Thompson, you'll see him in here calling his mother on the phone. That was
Children of God say they have very little time to get the message across. The end of the world, they believe, is coming in 20 years.
Hundreds of children of members of France, Spain, Australia, and Argentina were taken from their homes. Some members charged with child abuse.
144 children, the biggest police operation of its kind ever.
Police investigating a religious cult accused of brainwashing and sexually abusing hundreds of children.
Synchronized raids in 2 states against a religious sect known as the Children of God.
Children have been exposed to sexual contact with adults. Moses is an unknown figure, a mystery man.
The goal is to bring down my own mother, where you will cut. God damn. How can you do that to kids? How can you do that to kids that sleep at night?
Son, I believe you die. Please forgive me of my sin. Come into my heart, Lord Jesus.
The Lord gave us all visions, how we reach these young people. We've seen all these hippie type being sort of beaten up by the police in New York, demonstrating and against the war. It just suddenly broke my heart. And I thought, wow, this generation is really lost. We've got to reach them. So is there friction among us? Somewhere to live for? No. You want to give it up to them? You want to give it up to the Lord?
Daddy was a high school dropout. He was a surfer. He was gone more than he was in school.
My dad was on the beach one day surfing, and then some people came up, two guys came up with a guitar and played him a song. And we're like, you know, we're going out. We're here to change the world with love, and we think that Jesus is the answer. And you can come help us. My mom joined somewhere else, I'm not sure where. They stayed with the family in the States for I guess a couple of years, and then the family had this whole thing where it's going into all the world and preach the gospel at every creature. I have happy memories as a child growing up with my parents in Brazil. But slowly, the leadership of the group started to change things.
God's in the business of breaking up little selfish private families. God is not adverse to breaking up selfish little families for His glory, to make of the pieces a much larger, unselfish unit, the whole family.
In our group, we have 16 children and 4 adult shepherds. As you can see, we really are wall to wall here.
It's a shame that the family has divided our family. I'm really the product of the family. You know what I mean? I spent more time being raised by my nannies. My experience with schooling, it was patchy, you know. I mean, it was definitely only homeschooling. Most of it that I can remember was books that the group, you know, created to teach the kids.
And over here is sweet Johnny. We love you, Johnny. He's reading his kids' mom.
Thank you, Jesus, that we can be in this family to really serve you, Jesus. And thank you for Dad. We really need you, Dad, and we need the letters, and because all of our lives are such a mess, but we really need you to really help us. Thank you, Jesus.
Music is that. All the wonderful, beautiful things you enjoy right here on Earth, including beautiful people, beautiful men and women, beautiful youth, even beautiful sex.
And on the first take, I was masturbating to you. And when I came, I broke out in strong tongues. I couldn't control it. And the last few words were, Father, I love you. Daddy, I love you. I hope you're here again soon. Goodbye. I love you. Love you.
They had a thing called flirty fish, you know, the women would go out and tell people about Jesus, use their body, have sex. You know, essentially, you know, some people think it was just prostitution, other people had other pure intentions and, you know, just wanted to show God's love in such a way. At that thing. flirty fishing will be acknowledged because it was a huge part of the family doctrine. You know what I mean? It went on for what, like 10 years. So I'm gonna have to talk about that. You know, and you know, I'm not.
Had this longing that I wanted to come back to Jesus and be a close follower of his. And Deanna, well, first me.
God created boy and girl, able to have children at about 8 or 12 years of age.
You know, as I look back at my child, we were gone for, you know, a substantial amount.
And I think that's just a part of that. Pretty heavy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That group. Presentation. Well, the next one after him is, I think other people here have mentioned Tony Alamo, and another one that's now finally in jail. This is a guy for 25 years went under the radar, but in stories and reports I read, police were contacted, officials were contacted about what was going on at his compound down in Arkansas. You know, Dave mentioned them as part of the latter rain and the fact that they thought his wife was going to rise again from the dead. And this is a picture of him in their height when his wife was still alive. And that was the one that, like I said, they kept her body for a long time, was decomposing. I heard stories from some ex-members how bizarre, you know, that really was. And this is just talking about the state will continue interviewing family members of girls to determine whether it's in their best interest to be reunited with their parents. And the place was eventually raided. This is his whatever you want to call it, compound church. They lived all around the area there, the Tony Alamo Christian Church. I always tell people, and even the cops when I give this presentation, is that if you're looking for a church to go to, and the pastor's name is on the building, probably not a place you want to go. This is Tony now, and then I just want to, because he was finally arrested. There was a raid. They took all the young girls out, and I know Gloria had met a couple of the girls at the International Cultic Studies Association conference just in Maryland, just about a month ago now, and I know you told me you guys shared a lot together. They could, you know, them growing up in that group and things that occurred to them. I want to go back to. I'm just going to do. I like to get real stuff. I'm going to do an interview here that was done by Fox News from prison with Mr. Alamo, but you'll see as Julie Banderas calls him Alamo. Let me tell you.
His evangelical church has been called a cult by critics. Alamo denies all charges and blames the U.S. government and the Catholic Church for selling his name, Julie.
All right, Courtney Healy, thank you very much. Let's get both sides to the story. Now, again, Tony Alamo says the feds are just trying to harass him. Well, I want to talk to him himself about the raid and the allegations. And he joins us on the phone right now. Tony Alamo is on the phone with us. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Okay, Tony, why don't you tell us, why do you think the feds are trying to harass you, and why would they accuse you of child pornography and take 6 children from your compound?
Because this is what I've accused the federal government of, and the Vatican, and they definitely are guilty of homosexuality with young teenage and preteen boys and girls, and they're also involved in turning our little children on in public schools and letting them have
buying condoms and birth control pills for them. And so they're firing back. This is the most ridiculous. I mean, they charge me with all sorts of things down to the years, and I've beaten all of them. They set up the kids at the federal judge, and I beat that case.
Tony, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to ask you, isn't it true that you were accused in the past of polygamy, and that for those at home who aren't sure what that means, it means including marrying young girls that are younger than the age of consent, marrying them to older men that eventually will have sex?
That isn't true. Polygamy is in the Bible, and it's condoned by God. Now, if you weasels that got a complaint about God, you go to him and talk to him about that. I just preach the Bible, and
marrying a minor is not necessarily something that you would say God would condone, right?
I never married any minor.
But a lot of polygamous compounds, as you know, do marry children that are underage, and a lot of child abuse takes part in that. I mean, that is a fact. You have to admit that does go on in this country, and God's got nothing to do with that.
Well, God does have something to do. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. The Bible states that the legal age for marriage is at puberty. I'm not married to any teenage girls who don't want to be. I'm 74 years old.
I don't remember reading that in the Bible, sir, and I went to Bible class every Sunday school, and I don't remember saying anything about it. I mean, kids who reach puberty at the age of 12.
You don't know anything about the Bible.
So you're telling me that people that are 12 years old should be able to marry a 40-year-old, and that's okay?
What do you say?
You're saying that it's okay for a 12-year-old to marry a 40-year-old as long as she has reached
In the
puberty?
Bible, if you read the book of Janja, you'll see that Rebecca was 10 years old when she married Isaac was 40 years old.
I know, but that's not the law today, and we don't see 10-year-olds getting married. Let's face it.
The law of God never changed.
10-year-olds shouldn't be married, let's just say that, and they should be married a lot longer before they spend the rest of their lives with an adult. All right.
Listen, you just talk. You want to interview me, or you just want to yap your stupid mouth off?
All right, Tony, you know what? I'm not going to call you any names, but we're going to have to let you go, and I apologize if you didn't like my questions, but I believe that they were fair in any amount. All right, Tony Aleno, thank you so much.
You see the way he twisted that ball? He had sex with 12-year-olds, but he redefined it. 12-year-olds are adults. Yeah, I mean, you catch that. I've never had sex with a child, but with an adult. And what he said was, when they reach puberty, they're an adult. And of course, that quote he gave in the Bible doesn't exist. You know, Pastor, is there such a book as the book of Jasher? There is no such book as that. In the Bible, it's funny, how these guys just, you know, they make this stuff up. So, we go back to that. Okay, now that's a little bit of Tony. But he's in jail for the rest of his life. They charged him with all kinds of things. This guy here, this was an interesting case, just happened in 2011. This guy's in jail, legal case involving minister's naked ritual reopens a cult debate. Calling it light therapy. The minister, Philip Livingston, testified in a Kane County case that it repeatedly performed the naked ritual, claiming that it helped cure everything from drug addictions to yeast infections. I was going to say, ask Alan if that's something that he live the world ministry. And so, and what he says he did, he just laid with them all nude. That was, he didn't touch them, but we all know that that's not true. So, but they ordered all the kids out. There's a court order, he can't be around kids, and he's doing time right now. We talked about Israeli Hawkins, his Janja.
I got another newsletter today.
Oh, did you? From Israel? Yeah, he's down in Texas in a group called the House of Yahweh, and he was already convicted. This came out October 29, 2008. Sect elder convicted of sex assault on a child in Abilene, Texas. A religious sex elder who molested a girl under the guise of checking her for cervical cancer faces up to life in prison. And I'm not really sure how that case came out. But this is his compound. It's a bad picture down in Texas. The House of Yahweh, he calls it. And this, another group, this guy LaMonica, and his whole elder board was called Hosanna Church. They in Louisiana, And they were all having sex with most of the kids in the group. This is them being arrested. I always like to see pictures like that. But this is one of his followers in here, talking about 8 members. 8 members went to jail on this. Usually you only see one. This is something. They had cult-like rituals involving the rape of as many of 24 young victims from infants to teens between 1999 and 2003. So just to give you a little bit on him, this was a guy that was in Hawaii and had warrants out for his arrest. Tabota is his name, and moved to Oregon. Yeah, it says he's being investigated in Oregon for conspiracy to assist numerous adult men committing a sexual assault against children. And supposedly, like I said, they wanted him in Hawaii and in Oregon. We'll go back in time. Somebody you mentioned the Way International, right? This group here, it became in the 60s and 70s probably one of the largest, newest cults around. They estimated at one time there were over 100,000 members. Victor Paul Werewolf, who was the leader of it, the little wow on his shirt there. A lot of members would wear shirts that said that. That was part of their theology. It means the word over the world. They would also wear little buttons, SIT, that remind them to speak in tongues. And where we'll always tell them, if you begin to doubt or question my doctrine, speak in tongues until the thoughts go away. I mean, so just amazing. This year, I went up and actually did a tour of this place. We couldn't get inside with the local sheriff up there in Gunnison, Colorado. This camp is still going. A lot of their places they shut down in Emporia, Kansas. I think this one in New Knoxville, they're about the only 2 left. But they had large holdings. But they used to march around this with AR-15 rifles guarding the compound. The police up there were really worried because he was very anti-Semitic. He actually told the followers that 2 required readings in the book were the hoax of the Holocaust and the myths of the 6 million. Basically, the Holocaust never happened. So, and this is a picture of the headquarters in the Way. Now, I spent some time going to a lot of their twig meetings, and the reason they called them twig meetings, the whole organization was set up like a tree. This was the headquarters, was the trunk, the different stakes with the branches, and the little meetings were called twigs, and every member was a leaf. That's how they set it up. But this was the headquarters there. When he passed away, we had more problems because the group, a lot of the leaders split up. We can't even keep track of where all the splinter groups have gone. We get calls every once in a while of some of his sub-leaders. They tried, he appointed a guy named Craig Martindale to take over for him. But then Craig, if I remember correctly, was getting involved in some sexual exploits with the followers. And there was a court order, and they told him he couldn't be the leader of the group. It was really amazing to me that the courts, did that. So after he left, like I said, it broke up. But at their height, as you can see here, this is like right around 1978, 79. Every year they did a pilgrimage in New Knoxville, Ohio, and they would pay $100 a piece to set these tents up. And they would have like a week of rock music, and all the Way members would, get together. And that's a picture of one of those. This here was an article done, as I said, the Way did have weapons. We know for a fact in Gunnison they ordered 500 AR-15 rifles. The sheriff up there was a friend of mine, called me up and he says, what do they have rifles for? I thought they were a religious group. That's a good question. You always worry about things like that. So this here is just a quick blurb on some of the faith healing. I covered that with the cops too, because now in Colorado we got the law put in. I don't know, in around 2002, 2003, they passed a bill here that says it removed the religious exemption from the felony child abuse statutes. And so now in Colorado, if somebody lets their child die because of faith healing, they can and will be charged, which was long overdue. And other states are starting to come online with this. And of course, this is the FLDS raid. We talked about that. And the one good thing that came out of that it was amazing because the girl who called the police actually lived in Colorado Springs. She was a mental health patient. And she called up and told them about a kid that was being sexually assaulted there. And, you know, nobody really knows what she knows. They think it was part of the problem. But the good part about it is they found, oh, you mentioned that, Jan, didn't you? They found, because of that raid, they found those tapes. The tapes of Warren Jeffs having sex with the young girls. So at least it produced some results there. And that tape is the one that put him in jail. This is one of the pictures that were taken by the police when they went in, staying sweet. Talking to some of the ex-members that I've met over the years, the women that come out of the FLDS, that's what they were always told. They had to stay sweet. They had to keep their smile on their face all the time, you know, and be ready to please their husband. Usually they were one of, you know, many wives. This is just a picture of the police when they showed up there. But there's Warren Jeffs, who's currently and in jail. The 19th wife. It's funny, she wrote, the witness wore red because, as was pointed out, red was considered the color of Satan. So she actually pointed it out. And when you saw the interview with her, it was really great because she wouldn't have any sexual relations with Warren Jeff. She was married to his father, and then, of course, he inherited all the girls, and he would tell him, I don't want anything to do with you. And he would berate her. He told her, I'm going to break you, I'm going to break you. And she says in the interview that was on, I think it was on Dateline, she said when I got up and testified, she's the one that testified about what was going on in those tapes. Her testimony was essential for him being put in jail because she could identify the person, the acts, and everything that was going on. And that's what she said when she walked out. She just whispered to him, I broke you. You know, so you know, a great thing there. I was talking about this at lunch. We were talking about the Rajneesh. I try to throw in other groups because remember, cults. Every form of belief system and ideology, even psychology type things, cults are built around a lot of different types of things. But Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, he was the one that went up to Portland, Oregon, and Antelope, Oregon, and was out there, took over the town, got elected mayor. Then he wanted to be the county commissioner. He put poison in the reservoir, the drinking water. A lot of people got sick. It was salmonella, right? He
salad bars.
He used to only have about 200 or 300 close devotees, or sannyasins as they called them. But when he needed more votes, and this is when things really got crazy, they started going to the streets of LA and the big cities and picking up people to be members. And they had these massive sexual orgies up there. A lot of diseases were going on, and that's just the colors they wore. That's a Rolls Royce coming up. He owned 50 of those.
93.
93 of them? Oh, I guess 50 is not enough.
He was shooting for
So just
65.
he finally, the way they got him out of the country was immigration. You know, he had immigration violations and stuff there. That was a picture of him up there. When he went back to India, he died. And the woman they used to always interview on the news that was defending him, Sheila, this woman was really mean. She was on, remember that she'd be on, and she after things collapsed, she disappeared with a lot of his money, which I thought was pretty good. This is a guy right on the Colorado-New Mexico border, Wayne Dent. That was his real name. He changed his name to Michael Chubessa. Another guy that was a Seventh-day Adventist. This was a picture I got. This picture always amazes me because I always tell people, sometimes when people in cults, we used to refer to it as the 1,000-mile stare because they don't have any real personality, you know, when they're in the group. Sometimes they're not thinking. And I always ask people, I said, of all the people that are in this group, which one of these do you think is the one that sent me this picture? I mean, can you get this? I mean, the one that actually left the group out of those four. The other four are still in the group.
Prudence?
Yeah, Prudence. Yeah, see, I heard her do an interview, and I called her up and talked to her on the phone, and I said that was really, really great what you did. And but they changed their names in this group, and some of the Bible cults do that too, and that sort of disassociates them from who they are.
Mark, there's a great National Geographic documentary on this group, and you always wonder, like, well, what do members have to say when there's a prophecy that the world's coming to an end and that it doesn't happen? And the guy, they wouldn't let him into the compound, but he was outside the gates at midnight when the world was supposed to end, and all the members come out dancing and singing, holding candles, like, he just turned it into this whole ritual thing. But he ended up confronting the guy at one point, and you saw Wayne Bentz stare at him, and just you could see him shift, and he realized that he was being his power was being threatened. It was really. And that was a case where the girl laid naked with him, and she talks about it on the video in the documentary, which is, I think, would help get him.
Yeah, he was another one. He did like that guy. He said, I just laid in the nude with these 14-year-old girls, but I never touched them. And of course, the judge said, well, that's illegal too. You just admitted to it. And that's the sex charges when he was. And real quick, I'm going to go through one more, and I have other stuff that I want Janja to get up and give her talk. But this guy right now, this guy here, this is a current deal. They're looking for him. He was a former, dude, what I was talking earlier, he's a former, was one of the way leaders, one of the subway leaders, and this was one of the breakoffs. And like Werewolf had a lot of sexual things. This guy was having sex. They're looking for him right now, all over the country. I just want to play this one video on this one, and then I'm going to wrap it up there. I think you got the idea of what I'm talking about when I give this to law enforcement. Obviously, when I talk to other groups, I change it a lot. When I talk to churches, obviously there's some of these videos I won't even show in churches because they're, of the nature of things. So, but for law enforcement, I got to hit them, so they understand that this isn't just isolated things in a few groups, that I would say most of these cults, I would say 90% of them probably have something going on, illegal activities with children and things like that. I just want to play on this guy here. This is only 3 minutes long, and on him, because this is right up.
That video from myfox9.com, who really blew this story wide open. With me, the Chief Deputy Sheriff, Stephen Blackwell, who had no complaints. He had no idea that these girls had been kidnapped because their parents were going along with it. The girls held on an isolated ranch by a charismatic Christian pastor, Victor Bernard, now the subject of a nationwide
Two of them.
The parents went along with this, Rick.
Well, I think that
Yeah, we got
really like many of the parents that I've dealt with in groups called cults were under the sway of that charismatic preacher, and they pretty much went along with him because for a very long time they gave up their critical thinking, their independent ability to make their own decisions. And so whatever this man wanted, they went along with him. And like many other groups, the demands became pretty horrible, and the children suffered for it. And all the children did was have the bad luck to be born into this particular group, and they had no one to defend them. Unfortunately, Nancy, this is not a new thing. I mean, you know about the FLDS branch and the little girls there that were molested. Warren Jeffs is in prison. There's another man, There's another man also, Wayne Bent, who is in prison in New Mexico.
Right, I know this is not the first time it's ever happened. With me, in addition to Rick Ross, is Lindsay Trinami, a victim of the pastor Victor Bernard. Lindsay, when you look back on the 10 years that you were forced to live there, what do you have to say? What are your thoughts on it?
I feel like I was robbed of my childhood, my teenage years, experiences I should have had with my mom, my dad, my siblings and I were so close. before all this happened. I have regret. I mean, I feel, I don't know, for a long time I felt very ashamed of everything that had happened. I felt guilty, like somehow I deserved all of this kind of life. I have a lot of anger towards my parents, how they could, just leave their daughter.
Lindsay, what do they say now? Now that you've confronted them with what happened, what did they say?
My mom, the last time I talked with her was July of 2012, and I was trying to go over some specific incidents that happened with Victor, and the last thing she ever said to me was, well, I know some mistakes were made, but I still believe Victor is a man of God, and I'm going to follow him. And she doesn't want anything to do with me. And my dad, it's been very difficult dealing with him because, like, he wants to pretend nothing happened and just, pretend that I'm still a little girl from when I was like 5 years old. And, he's denied to me that he knew anything that was going on. And, he felt pressured to leave me there because, Victor has so much authority over everyone. So it's really hard for me to deal with him.
You know what, Lindsay Ternami? As hard as this is, as difficult as this is for you, speaking out right now, and as you have done to police, is a wake-up call to people across the country to protect their children. Everyone, the tip line in the search for Victor Bernard is on the screen now. 320-629-8342. He poses as a pastor, but he is a monster. Please help us put him behind bars.
Good for Nancy.
Go Nancy.
All righty, well, and he's still wanted, so if you see him, call that number. This is only about a month and a half old, and I wanted to put that there just to show this stuff is still current, it's still going on, so. All righty, that's it. I'm gonna close there. Do you want to come up right away? You probably should.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You don't need to introduce me? No, what's your plan?
Hey, Mark, you got a warning?
Yeah. I unplugged it. I don't have
Okay.
time. I have her presentation. It's coming up. Did you in there? Okay, there you go. You can just take over.
Just hit that, yeah.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to speed wrap through this because I know it's late and people probably want to get on with their lives after 2 days of sad and horrible stories. First of all, I certainly want to thank Lori for inviting me to this very special conference. As far as I know, as she said yesterday, the very first cult-related conference in Alaska. I was thrilled when she invited me. I'm even more thrilled now because, as I've mentioned to some of you, it's been in the hundreds every day since May in the town where I live in Northern California. So I was delighted to be able to escape that and come here. And I've never been here before, so I'm delighted to do some of the sightseeing in the next couple days. So let me begin. I have presented at many meetings and conferences, various gatherings and seminars, but I must say that I'm most honored and thrilled to be at this gathering. For those of you who suffered through months and years in the move, or perhaps another abusive group or situation, are the true heroes here. Many of you most likely don't know me or aren't familiar with my work, but I'm a professor of sociology, and my area of specialty is cults, controversial groups, terrorist indoctrination, and other situations of undue influence. I tend to use the term self-sealing system for these groups or families or churches or programs or organizations that engage in what some have called thought reform or coercive persuasion, and what most of us are familiar with colloquially as brainwashing. I came to this work as a result of personal experience. I was in a cult, a political cult, for more than 10 years in the 70s and 80s. We thought we were going to change the world and bring about social revolution. We modeled ourselves after the World War II resistance fighters, and more specifically, after communist organizations around the world. Believe it or not, our hero was China's leader, Chairman Mao Zedong, the man behind brutal campaigns against his own people and the mass murder and starvation of millions of Chinese. Needless to say, the organization I was in, which had many names, but the background name was the Democratic Workers' Party, which was pretty funny, was a rather abusive group, with lots of sitting in circles and subjecting some poor comrade to hours of harsh criticism, and many long hours of work for all of us, from about 5 in the morning until 1 the next morning, doing various tasks. Most of it just meant to keep us busy. Some of it actually had some political import. And that went on 7 days a week, year after year. I just had cataract surgery. And so I don't need glasses anymore, but I need glasses for reading. But now this paper is too far away, so it doesn't work either way, so I'm in trouble. But I do recommend cataract surgery, it's fabulous. Rules and punishments, demotions and public humiliation, all in the name of our cause and our great leader, Comrade Kim. When I got out at the age of 41, I spent some time healing, a lot of time actually, and did a lot of reading and self-directed study, trying to make sense of what had happened to me and my friends. I know that during those years in the cult, I became someone other than I wanted to be or ever was before. And through that self-education, I realized I had been in a cult, and then I learned everything I could about cults and thought reform and various instances of extreme behavior modification. So let's talk about the subject at hand, which we can understand as invasive modes of resocialization. These change processes, sometimes called coercive persuasion or thought reform, or some people use the term mind control, which I tend not to use, are intrusive methods, rituals, exercises, techniques, and practices aimed at an extreme resocialization, or in the case of children born in the cult, socialization of the individual, the aim of which is to get the person to adopt a new worldview, a new outlook on life, and a new perspective on the self. Conformity and compliance are demanded and inculcated in the followers. Some resocialization programs are may be sanctioned in our society, for example, military indoctrination to create a soldier, an unthinking killing machine. This is presumably done for the safety of the nation and its people. Other sanctioned institutional resocializations may include cloistered monks, nuns, or priests who willingly undergo removal and separation from the larger society in order to live out a spiritual or religious vow. Mental hospitals, formerly called insane asylums, are another site for a kind of resocialization to occur, which I suppose we as a society tend to condone, although they also can be places potentially rife with abuse and the use of techniques once thought acceptable, now deemed inhumane, such as ice baths, electric shock treatment, lobotomies, and so on. There's much that I now know and understand about the social psychology of coercive persuasion and its historical foundations, about how it's carried out, how and why it works. After all, I had the great honor of being trained to be one of the main brainwashers in the cult that I was in. And in fact, I was saying at lunch, I'm trying not to do any asides in the interest of time, but I was saying at lunch, the way this came about was once in a central committee meeting that we were having, one of our members stood up and said, "How are we different from the Moonies?" And he was immediately whisked out of the room, taken into the basement, and we didn't see him for quite a while. And after that, they decided that I should lead classes throughout the organization on why we weren't being brainwashed, but that we were willingly transforming ourselves and turning ourselves into these cadre steeled fighters. Anyway, back to this. I have studied these processes in depth for the past quarter century or more, which makes me feel very old. But I have to say that from everything I have read and heard about what you survivors here, have experienced, it simply falls well within the category of thought reform, and in some cases, absolute torture. So you're not exactly special, and hopefully it's comforting to know that thousands, perhaps even millions, have gone through similar experiences. Nevertheless, you are special in that it happened to you. And the specificity, the severity, and the intensity of what you experienced has a huge impact on your recovery. You're reestablishing or establishing your sense of self. You're becoming whole again, the person you want to be. I have found, both from my own experience as a former cult member and from years of studying and working in this field and meeting and speaking with literally hundreds of former members of closed groups, that the process of leaving the group and then putting one's life and also one's mind together can be and often is a very troubled time, fraught with anxiety, indecision, anger, worry, fear, either too little or too much sleep, confusion, guilt, loneliness, the inability to think straight, flashbacks, shame, depression, suicidal thoughts, identity crises, loss of memory, and so on. In other words, a wild ride on an emotional roller coaster. Having been held or lived in what sociologist Irving Goffman calls a total institution in his 1961 book, Asylums, is not an experience easily overcome. As Goffman wrote, these are forcing houses for changing persons. Each is a natural experiment on what can be done to the self. And just another aside, in my group, when I joined very early on, I was brought up into the ranks, and one of my first jobs was to be the secretary to the Central Committee, which meant I had to sit through hours of meetings with the leader and the 5 other people who were on the Central Committee at that time. And in one of those meetings, this was early, first year of the group, in one of those meetings she was talking about how she was organizing it and how she was setting up rules and the things she was doing, and she said, "This is my human experiment." Of course I had to write that down, and then, every night I had to go home and type up these notes, and this is the days of typewriters and carbon paper, for those of you who remember carbon paper, and I had to make 6 copies to push the typewriter really hard, and I would have to package those up into an envelope and deliver them before 6 in the morning to the 6 members of the Central Committee. So obviously I didn't get any sleep that night, so as we know, sleep deprivation is one of those techniques used. Despite the debates about nature versus nurture, in the end, social scientists have come to understand that the self is a social construction that arises out of social experience. And our sense of self is something that we as individuals establish and affirm as we make our way through life. Hopefully without too much undue influence from others, but certainly not without influential factors. Finding the right balance between those external factors and our internal self is a lot of what life is about. Now, in your case, and I basically directed this towards survivors, in your case, you've had a phase in your life overwhelmed with intrusion and undue influence of the most negative and harmful kind. Your journey was unexpectedly and brutally interrupted and or disrupted by forces outside yourself, by a force that claimed to have your best interests in mind, but certainly proved itself otherwise. But one way or another, you got out. So here you are, out in the world, facing the thrills, anxieties, and fears of constructing a new life for yourself, and also a new self, a new identity. Now, hopefully, you're able to do this construction of the self free of the constraints of a closed and closed-minded system. It's what I sometimes call the social construction of freedom. But that act or that process is not always so easy, is it? Despite how overjoyed we might be at finally having gotten out of the harsh, cruel, controlling environment, we have many new daunting challenges to face. and it's specific to each of you depending on what exactly you experienced and for how long. As agonizing as it was being in the abusive group, you may find or have found that leaving and being out in the world can also be agonizing. Some of you are no doubt wondering why your parents or loved ones were part of such an outfit. Or you may be wondering why you didn't get yourself out sooner. Or you may be thinking, asking yourself, how could I ever have bought into all that nonsense? How could I have been so stupid? Ultimately, as a self-reflexive person, which you must be, or you wouldn't even be at this conference, you have surely tried, or perhaps are still trying, to make sense of what that was all about. What was going on in that setting? How did it affect you as an individual? How might it still be affecting you? Why did you do the things you did? Participate in activities while there that you now think are reprehensible. Believe the things you did. Asking oneself such questions as those, trying to make sense of it all, is the personal quest many former cult members and others who have experienced similar traumas embark on. I hope that what I present here today will help you put it in perspective. I was going to talk about my definition, but I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. I think we all here understand what a cult is. But let me go on. Some cult members, when they look at their experiences in a closed, high-controlled group, that thing that I call a self-sealing system, may say that they liked it, or it was easier, or they wanted to be there. Some may say that they even got something good out of it. Remember, the fact that you may have got something good out of it, if you did, doesn't mean that there weren't also bad and harmful actions taken against you. I like to use the analogy that certainly there were some Germans who liked that the Nazis got the trains running on time, but that doesn't mean that Nazism was or is okay and without fault. But as with most things in life, we don't want to rush to simplistic explanations for what is an incredibly complex phenomenon. I imagine each of you is in a very different place with regard to this subject. Some perhaps fresh out, others who've been dealing with related issues for some time, still others just coming to terms with how the experience affected you. Some taking a more intellectual approach, others just beginning to tell your stories, and some becoming activists to work to eliminate these manipulators and abusers from our society. Yay, glory. I hope what I have to say has some relevance for each and every one of you. How I understand what we're talking about here are complex social organizations that are structured in a specific way so as to institutionalize and routinize social controls and social influences that are aimed at bringing about certain results that the leaders want. As a sociologist, I believe firmly that social interaction forms human conduct. So I don't think we could fully understand and move on from our experiences, reactions, and behaviors in totalistic groups without examining the structure, the social interactions, and then our own role within that context. So let me begin with my version of what that structure looks like. It includes 4 interlocking aspects. These are charismatic authority, a transcendent belief system, system of control, and a system of influence. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of those. And there are multi-level outcomes of this structure. At the organizational level, this creates what I call this self-sealing system, a system closed in on itself, a system that has all the answers. And on the individual level, it creates what I call a charismatic commitment and a state of personal closure, which I'll discuss further. I'm not sure what comes next. Okay, charismatic authority. So the authority figure, often a charismatic authority figure, although charisma is possibly less relevant in this situation, although the leader has to be a good enough salesman and self-assured enough to be able to sell the program or his church or his whatever it is to unsuspecting future members. The purpose of this first aspect, the charismatic authority, it includes these components: the charismatic attraction, the leadership principle, and the creation of the charismatic community. And the important aspect is that it's unique yet familiar. I think those of us who talked about some of our experiences and why we got into the groups we got into was because there was some familiarity with our life before that. And again, this obviously doesn't apply to kids who were born in a cult. I always say, I was in a political cult. I always say, I never could have joined a meditation cult. I can't sit still that long. But a political cult, that was for me. So the purpose of charismatic authority is to provide leadership and direction. The leader's goal is to be accepted as a legitimate authority on all things. This is accomplished by privilege, secretiveness, inaccessibility, power, and command. And the hoped-for effect is that the members, or the subjects, will identify with the leader and the group's goal. Secondly is the transcendent belief system. Now, the important part of the transcendent belief system for me, because many churches in particular have a transcendent belief system, right? Their goal is salvation, right? Or reaching heaven, or whatever, whatever it might be, or reincarnation, whatever. But for me, what's important about the transcendent belief system in a cultic situation is that it includes what I call the recipe for change. You are required to go through a transformation process, and the group is going to tell you exactly how to do that. You have to go through their specific direction and steps in order to be accepted into the group and attain whatever that goal is. So it's not like going to a regular church where they say, be nice to your neighbor, somebody new moves into town, take them a box of cookies, help someone out if they're in the hospital. Those are goals and values that are expressed in the church. Nobody's going to check up on you probably and see that you did that. Nobody's going to tell you what to wear, all of those kinds of things. Part of becoming a good Christian, say, is agreeing with those values and presumably carrying those out to some extent in your life. But in these cultic organizations, they're going to tell you specifically how to change. It's not just general guidelines. There's a specific process with specific methodologies that they're going to take you through. So the components of the belief system are the appeal, the moral imperative, this sense of urgency combined with the sense of freedom. Oh my God, I felt like, I really found the most perfect thing when I joined my group. And the constant shifts that the organization goes through and crises in particular that are manufactured to make you recommit. So the purpose of the belief system is to provide a worldview whose specific goal is to offer meaning and purpose through a moral imperative. The moral imperative being, once you know this, how can you not act on it? I don't know how many times I was told that. The doctrine is inviolable, untouchable, and comes down from on high. The desired effect is the internalization of the belief system, which is to represent, in a sense, freedom, in the sense of being connected to the greater goal and aspiring toward a sort of salvation, whether that's religious, political, weight loss, whatever it might be. Yet this transcendent belief system upholds the dangerous philosophy that Alan talked about yesterday of the end justifies the means, whereby blind devotion is a duty and helps turn the key in the lock. I always tell my students, if you join an organization and anything about it reeks of the end justifies the means, run the other way, because once you have that set up, anything goes. Anything can be justified. And as we've heard for the last 2 days, lots of horrible things do get justified. There are two important aspects to the transcendent belief system. One is the visionary component, the ideology, right? And here there's a quote. For the first time in my life, I have a firm faith there's something higher. That probably sounds like a quote any one of you could have said in your cult. This actually comes from Heaven's Gate members, right? So the visionary component is important, but almost more important is this organizational component of the belief system, this methodology that I talked about. And here's another Heaven's Gate quote. We represent the only way that exists that can offer anyone true freedom, liberation from what binds them. So not only do we have the truth with the capital T, but we have the exact way to get you there if you follow it. The next component of my framework is what I call the system of control. This is about discipline and subjugation. Again, it's the sort of carrying out of the end justifies the means philosophy. The components are the hierarchy and command structure, the organizational structures and processes, the rules and regulations. And again, this is from Heaven's Gate, but it could have been from my cult or probably any other cult. It will not be easy for you and anyone. It's supposed to be hard. You're supposed to suffer. You know, it's not easy becoming a political cadre. It's not easy becoming a soldier for Christ. It's not easy becoming a soldier for Reverend Moon, right? It won't be easy. That justifies all pain you're going to feel, right? So the purpose of this third aspect, the system of control, is to provide organizational structure and hierarchy. Rigid boundaries define inaccessible space and topics closed to discussion or inquiry. The specific goal is to put forth a behavioral system and a disciplinary code by means of rules, regulations, and a system of sanctions and punishments. The hoped-for effect is compliance, and better still, blind obedience. Fourth is the system of what I call the system of influence. And just to let you know, I felt in my work, this presentation to some degree is actually based on my dissertation. I went back to school late, obviously, after I got out of my cult to get my PhD, and that is sort of rewritten in my book, Bounded Choice. But I felt it was really important to separate the system of control from the system of influence, because I think a lot of times when people talk about cults or their own cult, it all gets mushed together, right? And I think it's important to separate out the overt rules and regulations from the more subtle influences within the cult, the peer influence, peer pressure, and these are things we don't so easily recognize because we're used to them every day in our lives. And I think when former members can separate those when they're kind of taking apart their cult experience, it helps them figure out how certain things happened, how certain things took effect, why they did what they did. So the system of influence is about rejection, self-rejection, and self-renunciation. And the components are the group norms, many times the unspoken norms that you just learn by being there, or by being told, well, you didn't take your shoes off, take your shoes off. Peer influence and modeling and commitment. The purpose of this final aspect, the system of influence, is to provide a confining social network of acceptable social interaction and group culture. Internalized norms, all-pervasive modeling, and constant monitoring serve to rule out inappropriate questioning and behavioral norms and a code of conduct which members are expected to live by. That is accomplished by various methods of peer and leadership influence and modeling. The desired effect is conformity or the self-renunciation required in order to remain on good terms in the group and one day attain the professed goal. I call all of this together, the fusion of freedom and self-renunciation, or for those philosophers here, freedom and necessity. That may sound all high and mighty, but soon one realizes that there can be no freedom when one has renounced or denied the self. All of these four parts fit together, let me hold on this a minute. All of these four parts fit together like a three-dimensional puzzle. Everything seems to fit into the schema or framework, and very little happens by chance. We talked earlier about the planned spontaneity. Even external events are interpreted to coincide with the cult's worldview. If you came into the cult as an adult, your life before you were admitted, your family, your role in your family, your schooling, your friends, your acquaintances, your various life adventures and experiences, all will be reframed through the lens of the cult worldview. In my group, when we first joined, we had to write what we called class histories. So we had to examine our whole life, our whole background, our family's background, whether it was middle class, upper class, working class. So that's what it's called, class history. And we had to write to the best of our ability, how we would analyze our family experience through the lens of, class. And of course, we would turn that in and it would get rejected. We'd say, no, this isn't right, your parents were bourgeois running dogs, blah, 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 whatever. And people would have to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it until it was acceptable to the leadership, until it reframed right? Their vision or their memory of their family and their life experiences through the lens of the cult. So that is a good example of how that works, this reframing. It's all reframed to fit the schema of this new overarching system that envelops you. For you as the inmate or the member, the goal of all of this was to perfect yourself against an impossible ideal and to criticize yourself and others for failing to do so all along the way. For the leader, the goal is to perfect a body of subjects, of followers, of acolytes, who will continually struggle for that impossible ideal, who will unquestionably carry out all assigned tasks, and who will laud the leader and the group all along the way. When this process works, the fusion happens. And here I identify 4 more aspects or phases. So I'm going to skip a couple of these slides, which was basically just a review, again, in the interest of time. This is this really sophisticated graphic that I developed in grad school. You know, they always make you like turn it into a picture. But that was sort of my horrible graphic. I have a better one that comes later, of the charismatic authority of the belief system, this control and influence, sort of dualisms in both the love and fear of person and how you as the individual are closed in the middle. So I want to go on to talk about sort of the next 4 phases of this, which are a bounded reality, the self-sealing system, personal closure, and a state of mind that I call bounded choice. So this is how it works. You become locked into a bounded reality created by the self-sealing system in which every aspect and every activity reconfirms and validates not you, but the system. There's no place in such a system for what social psychologist Edgar Schein called disconfirming information. Edgar Schein, as you may or may not know, wrote the book Coercive Persuasion based on his research with the Korean War prisoners of war. So, there's no place in such a system for disconfirming information. Nothing is allowed in that will challenge the system. The flow of information in and out is totally controlled. Not only in and out of the system, but in and out of you, of your mind. In this situation, what occurs is something called personal closure, an idea first introduced by developmental psychologist Erik Erikson and expanded upon by psychiatrist Dr. Robert J. Lifton. So personal closure is a particular state of mind that is akin to a psychological trap. Functioning within the group setting requires a commitment that demands single-mindedness, a style of thinking characterized by dogmatism and rigidity, and there can be no identity outside the context of the group. Because of the power that the authoritative leaders have over their subjects' lives, the threat of disapproval and punishment takes over one's psyche. Along with this comes a paranoia that focuses on the system you are in, and we heard lots of examples of that. You become afraid to do something wrong and be chastised, but it also raises paranoia about the evil outside world. Feeling duty-bound and obligated, members find themselves participating in or witnessing activities that in other times may have or would have violated a personal code of ethics. But now the leader or leaders are the only moral arbiters. Through repetition, ritual, and other activities, this process desensitizes members to behavior previously considered by them unthinkable or objectionable, not to mention society's view of such practices. The longer a person remains in this setting, the more invested you are, in a sense, and all the more complicit, perhaps, with group actions, behaviors, and techniques. This is where later the guilt and shame come in. At this stage, life outside the group seems less and less available as an option. And finally, by the means of identification and internalization, you feel yourself enveloped within the group and at the mercy of the leader. You are likely to still be experiencing cognitive dissonance. You know, this feels good, but I know it's wrong. The leader says it's okay, but I don't know, something feels really off. Everybody else is doing it. Why do I feel hesitant? You know, I think any of us who've been in a cult have had jillions of those moments, right? Cognitive dissonance. So even though you may still be experiencing moments of dissonance, Even though you may be conveying a sense of agreement, all this time you have had access to fewer and fewer outside sources of information, and therefore little capacity for any reality checks outside the bounds of the system. This is what I call the bounded reality. You know, if you think about it in our daily lives, we have reality checks constantly, right? We all know people probably from different avenues of life. We've got our coworkers, we've got our family, we've got friends from school, you know, whatever it might be. And so we get different points of view. We're not hearing only one point of view all the time, right? So, you know, if you're in college and you start dating someone, you know, you can ask your girlfriends, I don't know, what do you think of this guy? And they'll say, oh, he's a loser, get rid of him, or whatever, right? You can check things out, you know, or you want to go, you know, I wanted to go buy a couch, you know, well, of course I brought a friend along with me to help me choose, right? We have millions of ways that we have reality checks in our lives, watching TV, going to movies, you know. We might have an aunt and uncle who's really conservative, and then we might have another one who's really liberal. So we're constant, most of us, unless we live in a closed community, have many, many ways to check out what's going on in our life. When you're in a cult, when you're in a self-sealed system, you don't have that. So as you have spent more and more time in that, after a time, you begin to feel completely separated from any sort of pre-group identity if you came in as an adult. And of course, if you were born in the cult, you're really confused. And after a time, you cannot imagine life outside the group. Here, the process has come full circle to what is called the state of personal closure. Personal closure is not meant in the sense of completion, which is one use of the term. We talk, for example, about getting closure on something. But here we're talking about personal closure, about boundaries around the self. Lifton's usage refers to a closing in of the self in a kind of self-sealed inner world. Lifton described it as a disruption of balance between the self and the outside world. And here's what he said. Here, the individual encounters a profound threat to his personal autonomy. He is deprived of the combination of external information and inner reflection which anyone requires to test the realities of his environment and to maintain a measure of identity separate from it. Instead, he is called upon to make an absolute polarization of the real, the prevailing ideology, and the unreal, everything else. So, the personal closure that is the culmination of cultic life is profoundly confining because the individual is closed off both to the outside world and to his or her own inner life. Personal closure involves all aspects of your life. It's about everything, all of life, all of you. It's also much vaster than our understanding of the normal processes of conformity because of the depth and extent of the internalization and identification. The quality of the belief change in these groups actually shifts a person's value structure, either temporarily or permanently, right? It changes our value system. I'm going to see where I've gone from here. Yeah, I'm going to get to free will, but I'll get there in a minute. Within that context, all choices become institutional or organizational choices. And those choices are made by the leader, for no one else is qualified or has the authority to do so. Personal choices, should they arise at all, are now formulated and constrained by the self-sealing framework and the style of consideration which always puts the organization first. Thus, your choices become bounded choices, hampered and confined by the constriction, not just of the system, which certainly has a role, but more importantly and more potently by the constriction of your own thought patterns, which once more always put the organization first. So, what do we have here? The boundaries of knowledge have been shut tight and reinforced in three specific ways: through the process of resocialization, through the use of ideology, and through social control and social influence. The goals of resocialization is the restructured personality, and this reconstruction often revolves around one aim: to get the individual to identify with the socializing agent. In this case, whichever cult group or relationship you happen to have been in. In Goffman's writing on total institutions, he describes a process that he calls the mortification of the self. the process whereby the individual is stripped of all support and what was familiar to him before.